The Coca-Cola splashed across Vanessa Brooks's white blouse in a perfect arc, droplets catching the fluorescent lights of Conference Room B like liquid amber. For a moment, time crystallized. 12 pairs of eyes stared at the scene unfolding before them. A 42-year-old white manager standing over a black woman, an empty can still dripping in his trembling hand. "Maybe that'll help you wake up and smell reality," Travis Green sneered, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. Vanessa stood motionless, cola dripping from her chin onto the mahogany conference table. Her expression remained serene, almost Buddha-like in its composure. But something flickered behind her dark eyes, something cold and calculating that Travis Green was too drunk on his own power to notice. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the woman he'd just humiliated in front of the entire marketing team was Vanessa Brooks, former federal prosecutor, Harvard Law graduate, and wife of Marcus Brooks, CEO of Summit Edge, Inc. The same Marcus Brooks whose signature was on Travis's paycheck. For 3 months, Vanessa had walked among them as Julia Martinez, a mild-mannered marketing coordinator with an online MBA. 3 months of documenting, recording, and cataloging every microaggression, every coded insult, every systematic exclusion that had turned Summit Edge into a corporate plantation. As she reached for a napkin with steady hands, Vanessa allowed herself the smallest smile. Justice, she had learned in her prosecutorial career, was a dish best served ice-cold. The chess game was about to begin. 3 months earlier, Vanessa Brooks had walked through the gleaming lobby of Summit Edge, Inc. with the careful anonymity of a woman who understood power dynamics better than most. Her wedding ring was safely tucked away in her purse, her usual designer suits replaced with off-the-rack business casual, her Harvard confidence dimmed to an approachable flicker. The transformation was complete. Vanessa Brooks, powerhouse attorney and CEO's wife, had vanished. In her place stood Julia Martinez, eager new hire with slightly nervous energy and a carefully crafted backstory. "You must be our new marketing coordinator," Travis Green had said, barely looking up from his smartphone as she approached his corner office. When he finally raised his head, his eyes performed the casual inventory that Vanessa had grown to despise, the quick assessment that reduced her to a collection of assumptions and stereotypes. His handshake was limp, dismissive. "Travis Green, marketing director. I'm sure Jennifer went over the basics with you." His tone suggested that those basics were probably all she could handle. Vanessa watched him carefully, her prosecutor's instincts already cataloging details. The way his smile brightened when addressing the blonde assistant at the next desk. The subtle shift in his posture when speaking to the young white associate who'd started the same week. The micro-expression of annoyance when she mentioned her MBA and legal background. "Online degree, I assume?" Travis had said with a patronizing chuckle. "Well, we'll see how that translates to real-world applications." The conference room erupted in uncomfortable laughter. Sarah Mitchell from HR joined in with particular enthusiasm, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against her coffee mug in amusement. David Kim, the Korean-American senior analyst, shifted uncomfortably in his seat, while Maria Santos, the only other woman of color in the room, stared pointedly at her laptop screen. Vanessa absorbed it all, filing away each reaction, each complicit silence, each knowing smirk. Her phone, discreetly positioned in her blazer pocket, recorded everything. "I understand completely," she replied with practiced meekness. "I'm here to learn from everyone." What Travis saw was submission. What Vanessa was actually doing was studying the ecosystem, mapping the power structures, identifying the patterns that would soon become evidence in a case that would reshape Summit Edge from the ground up. By lunch that first day, she had witnessed Travis interrupt the only black software engineer mid-presentation, watched him assign her the most menial tasks despite her overqualification, and observed his careful choreography of exclusion. The meetings that happened without her, the emails that somehow never reached her inbox, the casual conversations that stopped when she approached. That evening, in the safety of her home office, Vanessa began building her case. Each incident was documented, time-stamped, cross-referenced. Marcus found her there at midnight, still typing, her prosecutor's mind fully engaged for the first time in years. "You sure about this, baby?" he had asked, massaging her shoulders as she worked. "They're not just discriminating against me," she replied, her voice steady with purpose. "They're destroying people's lives, their dreams, their sense of worth, and they're doing it systematically, confidently, because they think no one's watching. And now someone is. Now someone is." The attacks began subtly, the way institutional racism always does, death by 1,000 paper cuts, each wound small enough to dismiss individually, devastating in their collective weight. Travis's arsenal was sophisticated, honed by years of practice. He questioned her intelligence in ways that seemed almost helpful. "Are you sure you understood the brief correctly, Julia? It's pretty complex stuff." He undermined her contributions to team brainstorming sessions, cutting her off mid-sentence or crediting her ideas to others. "That's actually what Jake was trying to say earlier, right, Jake?" The psychological warfare escalated. Vanessa found herself excluded from client calls she had prepared for, her access to certain files mysteriously revoked, her desk relocated to a corner where foot traffic was minimal. When she raised concerns, Travis's response was always perfectly calibrated, never overtly racist, always wrapped in the language of performance and cultural fit. "I'm not sure Julia's communication style meshes well with our client base," he told Sarah Mitchell during a performance review Vanessa wasn't invited to attend, but which she later accessed through the company's inadequate digital security. The isolation was methodical. Travis had perfected the art of corporate exile, creating an atmosphere where questioning him felt dangerous, where solidarity with Vanessa seemed career-limiting. He rewarded those who participated in the exclusion with prime assignments and public praise. Those who showed her kindness found themselves on the receiving end of increased scrutiny. David Kim had tried to help once, offering to include her in a client presentation. The next week, Travis questioned every aspect of David's work, demanded rewrites of previously approved projects, and began copying David's supervisor on routine emails with subtle implications about attention to detail. The message was clear. Association with Julia Martinez came with consequences. Vanessa documented everything. The pattern of behavior was textbook, systematic, deliberate, designed to isolate and demoralize. In her evening reports to Marcus, she painted a picture of corporate culture that was both sophisticated in its methods and primitive in its motivations. "He's not just racist," she explained over dinner one evening. "He's strategically racist. He's created a system where discrimination is rewarded, where exclusion is incentivized, where silence is purchased with job security." "How long do you need?" Marcus asked. "Give me 2 more months. I want this airtight." But as Vanessa sat in her cubicle that afternoon, listening to Travis explain to a client why some team members weren't ready for high-level strategic thinking, she wondered if she could maintain her cover that long. The rage was building, demanding release, threatening to explode through her carefully constructed facade. She closed her eyes and imagined the moment when the truth would finally surface, when Travis Green would learn exactly who he had been underestimating for the past 3 months. Soon, she promised herself. Very soon. The humiliation when it came was public and deliberate. A masterclass in corporate cruelty designed to break spirits and send messages. The quarterly strategy meeting was Summit Edge's version of theater, where Travis Green performed his authority before an audience of 15 department heads, senior managers, and select team members. Vanessa had spent weeks preparing her presentation on demographic targeting strategies, research that could revolutionize their client acquisition approach. She never got to finish it. "I'm going to stop you right there, Julia," Travis interrupted, his voice carrying the kind of condescending authority that immediately shifted the room's energy. "I think you're getting a bit ahead of yourself here." The conference room fell silent. Vanessa, standing at the presentation screen with her laser pointer, felt every eye in the room focus on the unfolding drama. She had been 3 minutes into a presentation that represented 60 hours of research. "I'm not sure what kind of theoretical frameworks they taught you in your program," Travis continued, the pause before program loaded with implication. "But here at Summit Edge, we deal with practical, real-world solutions." Sarah Mitchell from HR nodded sagely, as if witnessing great wisdom. Two of the senior managers exchanged knowing glances. Only David Kim and Maria Santos looked uncomfortable with the public execution taking place. "Sir, if I could just explain the methodology behind these projections," Vanessa began, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "Are you arguing with me right now?" Travis's voice rose slightly, performing surprise for his audience. "In front of the entire leadership team?" The question hung in the air like a trap. Answer yes, and be labeled insubordinate. Answer no, and accept the dismissal of weeks of work. Vanessa recognized the no-win scenario immediately. It was the same technique prosecutors used to corner defendants, except this time she was the target. "I'm attempting to provide context for the data," she replied carefully. "What you're attempting to do," Travis said, his confidence growing with each word, "is waste everyone's time with unproven theories instead of accepting guidance from people who actually understand this business." The attack was perfectly calibrated, not overtly racial, but loaded with coded language about competence, about belonging, about knowing one's place. Vanessa felt the familiar rage building, the same fury that had driven her through law school, through her first federal case, through every boardroom and courtroom where she had been underestimated. But she also felt something else: satisfaction. Because her phone, hidden in her blazer pocket, was recording every word. Because Marcus's personal attorney was already reviewing similar recordings from previous incidents. Because in 96 hours, at the regularly scheduled board meeting, this entire charade would come to an end. "I understand," she said simply, returning to her seat with the dignity of someone who knew secrets that could topple kingdoms. Travis smiled triumphantly, unaware that he had just provided the final piece of evidence in a case that would end his career. "Good. Now let's look at some practical approaches to this quarter's targets." As he launched into his own presentation, Vanessa caught David Kim's eye across the table. He looked stricken, complicit in his silence, but clearly uncomfortable with what he had witnessed. When the meeting ended, he lingered as others filed out. "Julia, he started. "It's okay," she said quietly, gathering her materials with steady hands. "Sometimes people reveal exactly who they are when they think no one important is watching." "But someone important is always watching," she added, almost to herself as she headed for the door. That evening, Vanessa called Marcus from her car in the Summit Edge parking garage. "Honey," she said, her voice finally betraying the exhaustion she felt, "I think it's time to end this." "The board meeting is Thursday," Marcus replied. "Can you hold on 3 more days?" Vanessa looked up at the towering glass structure of Summit Edge, Inc., its windows gleaming in the setting sun like watching eyes. Somewhere up there, Travis Green was probably celebrating another successful day of corporate intimidation. 3 more days, she agreed. Then we change everything. The explosion came in stages, each escalation more vicious than the last, until the careful facade of corporate professionalism finally cracked to reveal the raw hatred beneath. It started with the announcement that Julia Martinez would be placed on Performance Improvement Plan, corporate speak for managed termination. Travis delivered the news during the Monday morning team meeting, his voice carrying the false sympathy of an undertaker. "This isn't personal," he explained to the assembled marketing team, though his eyes never left Vanessa's face. It's about maintaining standards, about ensuring everyone can contribute at the level Summit Edge demands. The first wave of escalation was psychological. Vanessa's access to client files was revoked immediately. Her desk was cleared of materials pending review of company property. She was assigned to work with Jenny Sullivan, a recent college graduate, on basic data entry tasks. A deliberate humiliation designed to reinforce her new status in the office hierarchy. "Think of it as back to basics," Travis said with mock encouragement. "Sometimes we need to rebuild from the ground up." The second wave brought public shaming. During the Wednesday all-hands meeting, Travis used Vanessa's performance issues as a teaching moment for the entire department. 43 employees watched as he dissected her work, her attitude, her inability to accept constructive feedback. "This is what happens when we lower our hiring standards," he said, his voice carrying across the open office. "When we prioritize diversity over competence." The words hung in the air like a slap. Several Black and Latino employees shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Maria Santos, the office manager, actually gasped. But no one spoke. No one challenged. The system Travis had built was working perfectly. Fear had purchased silence, and silence had become complicity. Vanessa sat through it all with the patience of someone who had prosecuted organized crime bosses, who had faced down threats and intimidation from adversaries far more dangerous than a middle management racist with a psychology degree from a state school. Her phone recorded every word. The third wave was the most dangerous. The moment when Travis Green decided that humiliation wasn't enough, that what was needed was complete destruction. It happened during the afternoon break, in the hallway outside the copy room, where conversations often took place under the illusion of privacy. Travis cornered her there, his voice low and venomous. "You know what your problem is, Julia?" he said, stepping closer than professional courtesy would dictate. "You people always think you're smarter than you actually are. You come into places like this thinking you deserve to be here, thinking your little diversity higher status gives you some kind of protection." Vanessa felt her prosecutor instincts surge. This was it. The moment when mask came off completely, when the careful language of corporate discrimination gave way to raw prejudice. "You people," she asked quietly, her voice steady as a blade. "You know exactly what I mean, and here's what's going to happen next. You're going to resign quietly with a nice letter about pursuing other opportunities, or I'm going to make your life here so miserable that you'll beg to leave. Choice is yours." The hallway was empty except for them, but Vanessa's phone caught every word. More importantly, she caught the look in his eyes. The absolute confidence of a man who believed he held all the power, who had never imagined that power could be turned against him. "I understand completely," she said, her voice carrying a double meaning that Travis was too intoxicated by his own authority to catch. As he walked away, Vanessa remained in the hallway for a long moment, feeling the weight of 3 months' worth of evidence in her phone, in her carefully documented files, in the testimonies she had quietly gathered from other victims of Travis Green's systematic cruelty. Tomorrow was Thursday. Tomorrow was the board meeting. Tomorrow, Travis Green would learn that some people were far more dangerous than they appeared. But first, she had a phone call to make. "Marcus," she said when he answered, "it's time to set the trap." The morning of reckoning arrived with the quiet intensity of a storm building on the horizon. Vanessa woke at 5:47 a.m., her internal clock set by 3 months of careful preparation. In the shower, she rehearsed the presentation that would dismantle Travis Green's career piece by piece. Over coffee, she reviewed the evidence one final time: 127 pages of documented discrimination, systematic exclusion, and corporate malfeasance that would reshape Summit Edge from the ground up. Marcus found her in their home office, uploading the final files to their shared drive. "You ready for this?" he asked, placing his hands on her shoulders. "I've been ready since the first day he opened his mouth," she replied, her voice carrying the quiet confidence of a prosecutor who had never lost a case she believed in. At Summit Edge, the day began like any other. Travis Green arrived at 8:15 with his usual swagger, coffee in one hand, phone in the other, completely unaware that his professional obituary had been written and was waiting to be delivered. He had plans for Julia Martinez, a final humiliation that would serve as a warning to anyone else who might challenge his authority. The morning progressed with ominous normalcy. Emails were sent, meetings were held, the machinery of corporate life ground forward with its usual efficiency. But beneath the surface, invisible currents were shifting. Marcus had spent the early morning in discussions with the board of directors, reviewing materials that had been delivered to their secure email accounts at midnight. At 10:30 a.m., Jennifer Walsh, Marcus's personal assistant, made a series of phone calls that would change everything. "Emergency session," she told each board member. "CEO's direct request. Full disclosure packet has been provided." At 11 a.m., Travis Green made his final mistake. He had orchestrated the scene carefully, a public termination in the main conference room, with the entire marketing team as witnesses. Vanessa was called in under the pretense of a final performance review, but the show was designed for maximum impact. "Julia Martinez," Travis began, his voice carrying the theatrical authority of someone drunk on his own power, "has consistently failed to meet the standards we maintain at Summit Edge." The conference room was packed. 23 employees, including several department heads who had been invited to witness what Travis called a teaching moment about accountability. "Despite repeated attempts at guidance and improvement," he continued, "she has shown herself to be combative, uncooperative, and frankly, not a good fit for our company culture." Sarah Mitchell from HR nodded solemnly, her legal pad ready to document the termination for the files. She had performed this ritual before, providing the administrative cover that made systematic discrimination look like due process. Travis was building to his crescendo, the moment when months of careful cruelty would culminate in public destruction. He had prepared a speech about standards, about merit, about the kinds of people who belonged at Summit Edge and the kinds who didn't. But as he reached for the Coca-Cola on the conference table, a prop he had brought specifically for this moment, a symbol of casual contempt that would serve as his signature on Julia Martinez's professional death certificate, he made a fundamental miscalculation. He assumed that power was permanent, that hierarchies were fixed, that the woman sitting across from him had no allies, no resources, no ability to fight back. He was about to learn how catastrophically wrong he could be. The Coca-Cola arced through the air in slow motion, catching the conference room lights like liquid amber before splashing across Vanessa's white blouse and dripping onto the polished mahogany table. The silence that followed was absolute. 23 people frozen in a tableau of corporate cruelty that would be remembered, dissected, and referenced for years to come. Travis Green stood over her with the empty can still in his trembling hand, his face flushed with the intoxication of absolute power. "Maybe that'll help you wake up and smell reality," he sneered, his voice carrying across the room like a blade through silk. Vanessa Brooks, not Julia Martinez, not anymore, sat motionless as cola dripped from her chin onto her legal pad. Her expression remained serene, almost meditative, but something flickered behind her dark eyes that Travis was too drunk on triumph to notice. What happened next unfolded with the precise timing of a military operation. At exactly 11:47 a.m., as Travis began his victory speech about consequences for insubordination, Jennifer Walsh appeared in the conference room doorway. Her presence immediately shifted the energy. Jennifer was known throughout Summit Edge as Marcus Brooks's gatekeeper, the woman who controlled access to the CEO's attention. "Excuse me," she said, her voice cutting through Travis's monologue with surgical precision. "Emergency board meeting. All department heads to conference room A immediately." Travis waved her off dismissively. We're in the middle of a termination here, Jennifer. This can wait. No, sir, it cannot. Jennifer's voice carried a authority that made several people in the room sit straighter. CEO's direct orders. All management personnel. Now. The word CEO hung in the air like a bell tolling. Travis's confidence flickered for the first time, but he was too committed to his performance to back down. Tell Marcus I'll be there in 10 minutes. I'm dealing with a personnel issue. That's when Vanessa spoke for the first time since the attack. Actually, she said, her voice carrying a new timbre that made everyone in the room look at her differently, I think Marcus would be very interested in this particular personnel issue. The way she said Marcus, not Mr. Brooks, not the CEO, but Marcus, with the casual intimacy of someone who had breakfast with him that morning, sent the first tremor of doubt through Travis's certainty. Jennifer Walsh stepped further into the room, and for the first time people noticed she wasn't alone. Behind her stood Marcus Brooks himself, his tall frame filling the doorway, his expression unreadable as he surveyed the scene before him. The conference room went dead silent. Marcus's eyes took in everything, the overturned Coca-Cola can, the wet stains spreading across Vanessa's blouse, the faces of his employees frozen in various expressions of shock, complicity, and dawning horror. When he spoke, his voice carried the quiet authority of someone who had built a company from nothing and turned it into an empire. Would someone like to explain to me what happened to my wife? The words hit the room like a physical force. Wife. Travis Green's face went through a series of expressions that would have been comical if the situation weren't so devastating. Confusion, disbelief, recognition, and finally, the gray pallor of a man watching his entire world collapse in real time. Vanessa stood slowly, cola still dripping from her hair, and looked directly at Travis for the first time with her full power visible in her eyes. "Hello, darling," she said to Marcus, her voice carrying 3 months of carefully controlled fury. "I believe we have some things to discuss." The transformation was complete. Julia Martinez, the meek marketing coordinator who had endured months of systematic abuse, had vanished. In her place stood Vanessa Brooks, Harvard law graduate, former federal prosecutor, and wife of the man who controlled Travis Green's entire professional existence. Marcus stepped into the room, his presence commanding immediate attention from everyone present. "Board meeting is canceled," he announced. "We're handling this right here, right now." Travis Green, for the first time in his adult life, had no words. The collapse of Travis Green's world happened with the inexorable precision of a controlled demolition. 3 months, Marcus said, his voice cutting through the stunned silence of Conference Room B. My wife has been working among you for 3 months, documenting what she described to me as the most systematic workplace discrimination she had encountered in 20 years of legal practice. Travis's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, his brain struggling to process information that rewrote everything he thought he knew about power, about hierarchy, about his own position in the Summit Edge ecosystem. "That's impossible," he finally managed. She's a marketing coordinator, Julia Martinez, from Phoenix." Vanessa reached into her blazer pocket and produced her phone, its screen showing a recording app that had been running for the entire morning's proceedings. "Vanessa Brooks," she corrected, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to cross-examining hostile witnesses. "Harvard Law, class of 2008, former assistant U.S. attorney for the Northern District of Illinois, and for the past 96 days, your most dedicated observer." She touched the phone's screen, and Travis's voice filled the room. "You people always think you're smarter than you actually are. You come into places like this thinking you deserve to be here, thinking your little diversity hire status gives you some kind of protection." The audio was crystal clear, devastating in its clarity. Several people in the room gasped. Sarah Mitchell from HR actually stood up, as if distance might somehow protect her from the implications of what she was hearing. "That recording," Vanessa continued with prosecutorial precision, represents one of 47 documented incidents of discriminatory behavior, hostile work environment violations, and what I believe any reasonable jury would conclude constitutes deliberate infliction of emotional distress. Marcus moved to stand beside his wife, his hand gently touching her shoulder where cola still stained her blouse. "Jennifer, please escort Mr. Green and Ms. Mitchell to security. Their access is terminated immediately." "Wait!" Travis's voice cracked with desperation. "You can't do this! I have a family! I have a mortgage! This is all a misunderstanding!" "No," Vanessa said quietly. "This is justice." Jennifer Walsh had already signaled to the security team, who appeared in the doorway with the efficiency of people who had clearly been prepared for this moment. As Travis was led away, his voice echoing down the hallway in a litany of excuses and justifications, Marcus addressed the remaining employees. "What you witnessed here today," he said, "represents everything we're going to change about Summit Edge. The culture of discrimination, the systematic exclusion, the abuse of power. It ends now." Maria Santos, who had watched the entire proceeding with wide eyes, raised her hand tentatively. "Mr. Brooks, what happens to those of us who didn't speak up?" Marcus looked at his wife, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "That depends," Vanessa said, "on what you do next. Change begins with acknowledgement. Growth begins with accountability. And justice begins with people finding the courage to stand up for what's right." Over the following days, the story spread through Summit Edge like wildfire. The marketing coordinator who had been systematically humiliated was revealed as the CEO's wife, a former federal prosecutor who had built an airtight case against workplace discrimination. Security footage of Travis pouring soda on her went viral on social media, becoming a symbol of corporate racism and the power of systematic documentation. The Department of Labor launched an investigation. 3 class action lawsuits were filed within a week. Summit Edge's stock price initially dropped, then surged as investors recognized the company's commitment to real change. Travis Green was arrested for assault, his LinkedIn profile quickly scrubbed of all references to Summit Edge. Sarah Mitchell was terminated for complicity and found herself unemployable in human resources. Both faced federal civil rights violations that would follow them for the rest of their careers. But for Vanessa Brooks, standing in her real office on the executive floor of Summit Edge for the first time in 3 months, the true victory was simpler and more profound. Justice had been served, and it tasted exactly like she had imagined it would: cold, precise, and absolutely devastating. 6 months later, Vanessa Brooks stood before a packed auditorium at Northwestern University's Kellogg School of Management, delivering the keynote address for their Executive Leadership Summit. "Power," she began, her voice carrying the quiet authority that had made her one of the most sought-after speakers on corporate accountability, "is not what you think it is." The audience, 300 executives, entrepreneurs, and business leaders, leaned forward, hanging on every word. The story of the Summit Edge investigation had become legendary in corporate circles, a cautionary tale about the hidden costs of discrimination and the unexpected ways that power could be wielded for justice. "For 3 months," Vanessa continued, "I worked alongside people who saw me as less than human. Not because I lacked qualifications. I held a law degree from Harvard and had prosecuted federal cases. Not because I lacked intelligence. I had built legal strategies that had taken down organized crime networks. But because they saw my skin color first, and everything else second." The auditorium was silent, the kind of focused attention that speakers dream of commanding. I could have walked into Summit Edge on day 1, revealed my identity, and demanded better treatment. My husband's position would have guaranteed it. But that wouldn't have changed anything for David Kim, the Korean engineer who was systematically undermined. It wouldn't have helped Maria Santos, the Latina office manager who was passed over for promotion 3 times. It wouldn't have protected the next black woman hired at Summit Edge after I left. She paused, letting the weight of those words settle over the audience. Real power isn't about commanding respect through titles or connections. Real power is about using your privilege, your resources, and your platforms to dismantle systems that prevent others from accessing their own power. The transformation at Summit Edge had been comprehensive. Marcus had promoted 12 employees of color to management positions within 6 months. The company had implemented blind resume reviews, mandatory bias training, and anonymous reporting systems for discrimination. Most importantly, they had changed their hiring practices to actively recruit from historically black colleges and universities, Hispanic-serving institutions, and other diverse talent pipelines. Revenue had increased by 43% in the first quarter after the changes, as diverse perspectives brought innovative solutions to client challenges that had previously seemed intractable. "The day Travis Green poured soda on me," Vanessa said, "he thought he was asserting dominance. What he was actually doing was providing the final piece of evidence in a federal investigation that would reshape corporate accountability standards across the industry." The audience erupted in applause, but Vanessa raised her hand for silence. "But here's what I want you to remember," she said, her voice carrying the passion that had driven her through law school, through her prosecutorial career, through 3 months of systematic humiliation. "I had resources that most people facing workplace discrimination don't have. I had a powerful husband, financial security, legal training, and the luxury of fighting back without fear of losing my livelihood. Most people don't have those advantages. Most people facing discrimination are fighting alone, without safety nets, without backup plans, without the certainty that justice will prevail. They need allies. They need advocates. They need people in positions of power to use that power responsibly." The speech concluded with Vanessa's call to action, the same message she had delivered to corporate audiences across the country. Don't wait for someone else to do the right thing. Don't assume that because you haven't witnessed discrimination it isn't happening, and never, ever underestimate the power of one person with evidence, determination, and an unshakable commitment to justice. As she walked off the stage to thunderous applause, Vanessa thought about Travis Green, who had been sentenced to 6 months in federal prison and would never work in corporate America again. She thought about the dozens of employees who had reached out to share their own stories of discrimination, many of whom had found the courage to speak up because of what they had witnessed at Summit Edge. Most of all, she thought about power, how it could be hidden, how it could be misused, and how it could be transformed into a force for justice by people who understood that true strength came not from crushing others, but from lifting them up. The revolution, she realized, had only just begun. The message spread across social media with the velocity of truth finally given voice. If you see discrimination happening at your workplace, document it, record it. Build your case with the same precision a prosecutor would use in a federal courtroom. Vanessa's words from the Northwestern speech had been clipped into a viral TikTok with over 2 million views. Don't assume the person being targeted is powerless. Sometimes the quiet ones have more strength than you can imagine. The hashtag #SummitEdgeJustice became a rallying cry for workplace accountability. Employees across the country began sharing their own stories, armed with Vanessa's example of systematic documentation and strategic patience. The video of Travis Green pouring soda on a woman he thought was defenseless had become a cautionary tale about the hidden costs of assumptions. "Remember Travis Green" became shorthand for the dangers of underestimating people based on appearance, position, or perceived powerlessness. Vanessa's story resonated particularly powerfully with women of color in corporate America, who shared it as both inspiration and instruction manual. The comment section of every article about the Summit Edge case was filled with testimonials from people who had implemented her strategies, documenting discrimination, building evidence, waiting for the right moment to strike back. "You never know who you're really dealing with," read one comment that had been liked 50,000 times. "Treat everyone with respect, not because you might get caught being cruel, but because basic human dignity should be non-negotiable in a civilized society." But for Vanessa, The most meaningful responses came from the David Kims and Maria Santosis of the world, the employees who had been voiceless for too long and were finally finding their power. David Kim had been promoted to Senior Engineering Manager and now oversaw Summit Edge's diversity recruitment initiative. Maria Santos was pursuing her MBA on the company's dime and had been fast-tracked for executive training. Both credited Vanessa's example with giving them the courage to speak up about their own experiences and advocate for systemic change. The story concluded where it began, with power, but power transformed and redirected toward justice. Travis Green had learned the hardest lesson of his life. In America, in corporate boardrooms, in conference rooms where soda gets poured and dignity gets destroyed, someone is always watching. Someone is always recording. Someone is always building a case, and sometimes that someone has more power than you ever imagined. Justice delayed might be justice denied, but justice served cold hits different. Travis found that out the hard way when he poured Coca-Cola on a woman he thought was just another disposable employee. He never imagined she was married to the CEO. He never imagined she was recording everything. He never imagined that his moment of casual cruelty would become a masterclass in how power, when properly deployed, could change everything. The moral of the story echoed across corporate America. Treat people right. You never know who you're really dealing with.